Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Dyer and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, June 14th, Flag Day. On this day in 1777, the Stars and Stripes became the official flag of the United States. And yes, there's been a lot of talk about other flags over the last week, so we will get to that, but first, I want to introduce you to this week's panel. Our insiders, we have Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward, along with David Kopel, research director at the Independence Institute. Penfield Tate, a Denver attorney and community leader who has served in both the Senate and the House in the Colorado legislature. And at the end, we have Alayna, Alvarez, reporter for Denver Axios. Thank you all for coming in. Let's start by discussing what has ensued over this past week within the Colorado GOP. With the primary just a couple of weeks away, when Republicans will select nominees for 4 different congressional races, the strongest push yet is underway to oust the chairman of the party, Patty.
Last week, I started off talking about Dave Williams, and now I get to double down just as he did on Monday. So Dave Williams, the head of the GOP, Colorado GOP, had done the God Hates Pride and also God Hates Flags email 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago. He got a lot of criticism instantly. You know, the first congressional candidate rejected the nomination. He's still in the race. Others were very quick to criticize him. But on Monday, once again, he sent out the same message. In the meantime, other Republicans are really acquitting themselves well. You have the head of the Jeffco Republican Party, Nancy Pelosi, and she led the move to let's get the signatures and get Dave Williams out as the party head. It is time for Dave Williams to step aside from at least the party management.
So these petitions have been signed. There are signatures. David, what is the next step? Because there has to be a meeting, and he has to be the one to call the meeting, right?
Yeah, by the state Republican Party rules, once you have 25% of the Republican officials sign a petition for him to be removed, then there has to be a vote within a meeting and a vote within 30 days. He said he'll have the meeting, and it would need 60% of the Republican Central Committee to oust him. And I think there's a good chance of that because there are so many reasons. First of all, as state Republican chairman, he's been misappropriating state Republican funds for his own campaign for Congress. Second, as part of that campaign, he's been sending out fundraisers that claim to be raising money for Trump, but he's actually keeping all the money for himself. Third, whatever you think of, the gay rights issue, some people can campaign effectively on that. For example, Williams' opponent for the El Paso County Congressional District is Jeff Crank, who in 2006 successfully led the campaign against a ballot initiative to create a form of civil unions. And one of the reasons he won that election was he didn't go around saying that all gay people are groomers or degenerates. Republican voting gays can increase as long as you don't have jerks like Dave Williams going out of their way to drive them away from the Republican Party.
Penfield.
You know, the difficult thing about this fellow is he behaves like a criminal in many respects in terms of misappropriation of money. You can't tell whether he's a true believer, whether he believes the stuff he says, or he's just a political opportunist. I tend to lean toward the opportunist side because anyone who is truly invested in the success of the Colorado Republican Party would want to conduct themselves and the party in a fashion that maximizes the ability of their candidates to get elected. But this guy runs around saying and doing stuff that is, to many people, personally offensive, to some people, potentially criminally sanctionable. But he does it in the name of the state party, which casts a pall on every candidate who then has to run 2 races, 1 on the merits of their own qualifications, and 2, distancing themselves from the fool who's running the party into the ground by saying stuff that they may not personally believe, but now they've got to run and defend themselves against what their state party chairman is doing, who's actually supposed to be supporting their campaign.
It's important to remember that 15 years ago, when Dave Williams was student body president at UCCS, he was impeached by the student government for discrimination against an LGBTQ campus group. So clearly, his views haven't changed that much, nor has he apparently learned many lessons from expressing them as forcefully as he has. Now, the big picture, it's been talked about for a while that the Republican Party has been cannibalizing itself. And this is the latest example. I mean, look at Aurora Council member Curtis Gardner, who just left the party and registered as unaffiliated. We have 2 GOP candidates running who have rejected the party's endorsement. Again, we have 100 Republican leaders across the state who are signing this petition to get Williams out. And I think it's really a sign that the party is waking up to how it's become a national laughing stock. This pride flag incident was featured on The Daily Show on Comedy Central last week, just to give you an idea of, how many people are laughing at this party. So I think it's fair for a lot of people right now to be calling Nancy Pelosi brave, but, I think many people would also argue she doesn't have much of a choice. It's either this or watch the party, experience a mass exodus.
The race for Denver's next district attorney is between 2 Democrats. There is no Republican running, so this is it. Either John Walsh or Leora Joseph will be elected in the primary on the 25th of this month. The party is split, and David, this is a huge position, a huge amount of responsibility for our biggest city in Colorado.
I think the voters have the choice. If you think the public safety situation in Denver is good and you're satisfied with it, then you would vote for John Walsh. He's the former U.S. Attorney for Colorado and is endorsed by Beth McCann, the current district attorney, and lots of people in her office. Joseph, on the other hand, is endorsed by the Denver Police Protective Association, the union for the Denver police, wants to, while still being strict on officers who misbehave, have a better relationship with the police for an integrated approach to criminal justice and to stop this catch and release we have. Just a few days ago, a recycling store, here's my lamp, let's have somebody else buy it, got destroyed by arson and is going to be out of business on South Broadway in Bayard. And the guy who did it was out on bond for felony arson, and felony burglary from January, and had 4 other arrests from November through January. So it's an ineffective district attorney's office that leaves a guy like that at large and hasn't brought that guy to trial yet and put him in prison.
Penn.
This is an interesting race when you look at it in context. 4 years ago, when Beth McCann was running for her last term, one of the things she ran on was the fact that she had a track record of holding police accountable for the use of excessive force and over-policing, particularly communities of color. Now you've got 2 candidates running who are both running on a I'm going to be strict on crime platform. And so it's just interesting to see how things have changed over the 4 years. John Walsh, of course, has run for DA before and not been successful. Leora Joseph has not run for DA before. She's new to running for office. As I visit with Democrats, and it's interesting how Ms. Joseph, as the newcomer, has gotten a lot of support among elected officials and sort of party activists, which surprised me. I thought most of that would flow to John Walsh. Not all of it has. There really isn't a lot of difference in most of their positions.
And Axios Denver has written a lot about these 2.
Yeah, we've been covering the race pretty closely. And one thing that we wrote about recently was about campaign finance reports, because money tends to be a good indicator of who will win elections. It's not, the end all be all, but it's a good indicator. And right now, John Walsh has a pretty sizable advantage over Leora Joseph. But as Penn said, both candidates they don't hold wildly different political ideologies. We're framing this a little bit like they are pretty much splitting the Democratic Party and Democratic leaders. Now, when I interviewed both of them recently, they disputed that notion. They don't see it that way. But I think the facts speak differently. So we have Walsh supported by 3 former Democratic governors. We have Joseph, who's supported by 15 former and current state Democratic lawmakers. And it gets even more interesting when you zoom in a little bit more. So for example, U.S. Senator John Hickenlooper, he's backing Walsh, but 4 of his top former aides are lining up behind Joseph. So it's pretty interesting. The bottom line, just talking to political strategists, is that a contest like this, that's this healthy, it's Democratic focused, is really good for the party, and it's good for Denver no matter who wins.
we're seeing grown-ups who have very civil conversations. They are really talking about the office. They're talking about an issue that everyone cares about. They had a debate at Brother Jeff's last night. They are able to, they do have some differences. They're able to explain them, but they also can do it in a way that makes you think either one would be a great civil servant. Leora Joseph has a little emphasis on mental health, which I think would be a good addition to the DA's office, but there's no question John Walsh is also competent. So it's a good problem for Denver. It stands in such stark contrast to having to deal with a Dave Williams type situation if you're a Republican. What it also shows, though, is there is a hunger in Denver, and so did the mayor's race show with 17 candidates, for people who want to serve, and they're not able to do it really in the 1st Congressional District because Diana DeGette's been there so long. But they are going out for these other offices, and it's a great problem for Denver to have 2 such competent people.
Okay. Before we move on from election talk, Governor Polis did 2 things this week. One was sign on members of Colorado's National Guard's Defensive Cyber Operations Unit to make sure our election is safe and secure coming up. And then something he almost never gets involved with, and that's races. Governor Polis has endorsed San Camacho to unseat current state Representative Elizabeth Epps. Anyone want to comment on those?
Elizabeth Epps is the worst state representative in Colorado in at least this century, and really, I think, as far back as anybody at this table can remember.
Well, let's not forget Doug Bruce was a lawmaker very briefly, so I'm not sure she gets that title. But it is interesting that Governor Polis came forward.
Thank you, Patty. Doug Bruce was the name I was going to mention. I have a couple others, but what I would offer this, Kyle, is the governor making this endorsement is sort of similar to the Dave Williams story, because although the Republican Party is fracturing in plain view, the Democratic Party is going through a similar problem and process in terms of its what some would call the far progressive wing versus the more traditional moderate wing. And, you know, to see a governor and frankly a lot of other state legislators openly endorse someone who's challenging one of their colleagues is typically unheard of. But as we've talked about before on prior shows, you know, Representative Epps has, in my opinion, behaved in a fashion on occasion not befitting someone who is elected to office. There's a way you raise issues when you're part of the legislative body, and sometimes you win the vote and sometimes you lose the vote, but decorum requires that you handle yourself in a certain fashion. She hasn't always done that, and it's coming back on her now.
All right. The Aurora City Council signed off on tough love measures this week for people who are experiencing homelessness. The camping ban is extended to run along 225. The 72 hours heads up that the sweep's coming, that's gone. And citations will be given out to people at encampments. And Penn, if one receives one of these citations, they have to attend a new court that's being set up.
Yeah, and I think tough love is a misnomer. I think it's just tough enforcement, but I don't think there's any real love behind this. Aurora is one of these communities that's decided that we don't want encampments, so we're just going to forcibly remove people off the street. That's their prerogative. That's what their city council has done. I'm not convinced that the way they're trying to sell this new community or homeless persons court is really going to be supportive. The devil's going to be in the details, and if they really fund the support services that are needed for some people who find themselves unhoused, that's really the difficult test. I mean, in Denver, Johnston has taken a different approach. His approach has been, let's get people off the street and into shelter and then provide services. Aurora's not talking about the shelter part. They're just saying, let's get them off the street. We don't want to see them. We don't want them to be there, and we'll figure out the rest of it later.
This policy is coming down at a really interesting time because the U.S. Supreme Court is actively weighing right now a homeless camping ban. That ban is in an Oregon city, but however the court decides will have an effect on how Colorado cities enforce their own laws. So that decision is likely to come down by the end of this month, but as early as today when the show airs. I think, as Penn said, this is obviously quite a contrast to Denver's Housing First approach, which a lot of advocates have praised for being successful in not only getting people off the street, but keeping them off the street, at least for now. I also find it interesting that it's as punitive as it is, considering how relatively small Aurora's homeless population is compared to Denver's. So the latest data that we have from last year's point in time count, there's a new one coming, we'll see the data next month, but the latest data that we have shows about 572 people in Aurora experiencing homelessness and just 163 of them unsheltered. That's compared to Denver, which has nearly 6,000 homeless people and 1,400 of them unsheltered. So it's quite interesting to see Kaufman come down and the city council to come down this hard. And it's important to remember that the reason Denver even adopted this housing first approach was because the camping ban that it has, which it enforces very loosely now, wasn't effective.
Penn's absolutely right. There's no love here. We'll see how efficient it is. I've driven along I-25 and 225 in Aurora. You see there are definitely people camping by the sides of the highways. I don't know if they're going to send the police out to make sure they stay away from that rather than chase after speeders, but Aurora's got a lot of work ahead of them to see, will they get these people to court? I mean, would you go when you've got the carrot or the stick? They'll either rip up your citation if you get a service, or you could maybe go to another city and just ignore Aurora. So I think compared to Denver's, Colorado Springs has something kind of in the middle, which might be the most effective way.
And if you don't show to court at all, they could arrest you.
Presumably, so you just go to another town
So you go
that
to
might
another
not be chasing you.
Right, David.
These illegal campgrounds are, first of all, taking public space away from the public, and second, they are crime hotspots and also associated with a high amount of retail theft, which makes it very hard on small businesses. The Aurora policy says we will give you shelter, but it's going to come with treatment, and the more you go through treatment, the better shelter you get, up to at some point having your own individual room. But if you won't accept treatment, then you're not going to get a free pass for violence, for trespassing, and for retail theft.
Summer is here, we can tell with the heat, but it is hardly easy going here in Colorado. Fire broke out this past week because it was an unattended campfire that was just left, and there was a big fire in Twin Lakes, southwest of Leadville. There have been unprecedented numbers of wildlife attacking people in several counties in our state. And then CPW is also reporting a higher than normal number of water deaths on our reservoirs and our lakes. I know this is the time where we're all going to just kind of sit back and relax. But Alayna, these three things right here show us that we have to be aware, and our visitors to our state too.
You're absolutely right. No, be cautious outside. And we just read a story about Colorado Parks and Wildlife's recorded attacks from elk, moose, deer. It was really interesting to hear what they had to say. So we've counted at least 6 attacks on people, and it's not just people walking their dogs, which you would think, you might expect because these animals see them as predators. But it's also been a kid riding a bike, a kid on the playground. And so what's going on is, number one, it's calving season. So there are female animals that are very protective of their young right now. But what's unprecedented and what wildlife officials are pretty stumped about is the actual physical contact that's happening between these animals and people that have led to some really serious injuries too. They gave us some tips on how to stay safe if you're outside. Number one, keep your dog on a leash. Number two, if you are charged, don't turn your back. Keep eye contact and back away and try to put something like a tree or a big rock in between you and the animal. And then 3, this is a big one, is just if you see a baby animal that appears abandoned, leave it alone, because oftentimes their mom is out foraging for food and has left them purposefully, because I didn't know this, but I learned that baby animals like moose, deer, and elk, they're born scentless to keep predators from smelling them. But if you touch them, it not only takes away their scentless armor, but can force their parents to abandon them.
So no selfies when you see baby animals, or else. Patty.
I think you can explain it. The wildlife is just as upset as everyone else is about our presidential candidates. But I'll skip the wildlife and go to the people who leave fires unattended. It's incredible that after all this time, after everything Colorado and the rest of the West has been through, that someone could leave a campfire unattended. So we're going to have another long, hot summer, very hot, judging from today. So people have to learn to be careful. And then the flip is that there's too much water in the rivers, in the creeks. You have to be careful there too.
And there are a lot of bans. You can't go tubing on most places now.
Right, Clear Creek, yeah, they've definitely limited what you're able to do, and pay attention to those rules.
David, you live in Boulder. You tempted to go into the creek?
No, which is why I'm still alive today to be on this show. It's not just an issue of encroachment. Some of these attacks have occurred in the town of Estes Park, which has not been, expanding wildly. It's a pretty fixed location, and the locations come in, sort of the classic regular Estes Park, which used to be safe. Another protective thing for people to do, I think, is to have a firearm. There was a pregnant woman in northeastern El Paso County who was attacked by a deer, and the woman's father ran out, shot the deer with some rubber bullets, which didn't work, and then so had to use live ammunition. I'm not saying a handgun is necessarily going to stop a moose, but if the moose is coming at you, at least it gives you a fighting chance.
David, I didn't know you were going to go there with handguns, but we'll save that for another day. I think this is a situation that's been building for a while, and I would offer this, and most viewers won't know what I'm talking about, but folks, this isn't Rocky and Bullwinkle. For years, we've seen signs that say, don't feed the wildlife, and people feed the wildlife. For years, we've seen signs that say, stay away from the animals, don't try to take pictures with them, and people won't stay away from them, and they take pictures with them. I think part of what's happening is some of the wildlife has gotten used to being around human beings. And while they don't understand our behavior all of the time, and we're encroaching on their habitat, some of the fear factor is gone. And so I think that's part of what's creating a more difficult environment now. And finally, I hope we come up with some sort of enforcement regime, because these people who leave unattended campfires around, that we've got to deal with them in pretty severe terms. That's inexcusable.
Now it is time for us to go down the line and talk about some of the highs and the lows of this week. We start on the low points so we can end on a happy note. Patty, let's start with you.
I do not want the beautiful people of Denver to be defined by that hideous song from the unsinkable Molly Brown that is all over United Airlines commercials right now. So rise up and ask them to please take it down.
Well, this one, even if it's a disgrace, still has a happy ending. At the Englewood School Board meetings, public comment is allowed by residents of Englewood, by parents of students, by staff, or by present or former students. Tate Anderson, the disgraced former member of the Denver School Board, is none of the above. So to protest that he's not allowed to speak in public comment to the Englewood School Board, he's taped his mouth shut. So I think that's the most constructive thing he's done in public life, and please keep it up, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, Ben.
Mine's on a national level, and it's difficult enough with candidates disparaging governmental institutions and someone like Dave Williams, but it's really difficult when we lose faith and confidence in our court system. And from my perspective, the way two of our U.S. Supreme Court justices are behaving in terms of what I think are very obvious conflicts of interest, or at the very least, clearly the appearance of impropriety, which would warrant them recusing themselves from a number of cases coming up, is distressing and disturbing. Once people lose faith and confidence in the court system, their faith and confidence in the rule of law is not far behind. And I'm concerned with how the justices are behaving, and I wish if Congress could get its act together and come up with an ethics code, but they won't.
Denver law enforcement is in hot water again. So a man just filed a civil rights lawsuit after an officer body slammed him last year during the Nuggets championship parade and left him with a traumatic brain injury. Meanwhile, City Council earlier this week approved $500,000 worth of settlements over cases involving Denver police and sheriff's deputies. And this is just the latest in millions of dollars in settlements and jury trials that the city's paid out over the last few years for misconduct claims.
Yep. All right, let's talk about something positive that happened.
If you didn't come down to Mile High Jazz Fest last weekend, which was great, you've got another chance. It's the Juneteenth Music Festival on Welton Street. There will be no attacking moose. It will all be a great time.
Bow Wow is going to be there.
Bow Wow he will not pound you.
This started in the 1950s, this Juneteenth festival.
Right,
It's been
it
around
started
for a long time.
long before it became a national holiday, so it's a great reason to celebrate.
Yes, all right. David.
All over Colorado, interns are starting their summer internships. Watching this taping are two of my interns, Savannah and Joey, and in fact, running one of the cameras on this program right now is a Channel 12 summer intern.
Sophia, yeah, all right, good.
Yeah, I love the intern programs. A couple of my former interns are now employees with the state legislature. Patty stole mine, but it's good to reinforce it. Juneteenth is a wonderful celebration. We're down here on the Points taping now. Folks ought to come down to the Points and experience Juneteenth in the Jazz Festival. It's going to be a blast.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun weekend.
So after getting snubbed last year in the James Beard Awards, Colorado has 2 new winners, which is really exciting. It was announced this week. So Erica and Kelly Whitaker, they're a couple. They run numerous restaurants in Denver like the Wolf's Tailor and Hey Kiddo. They were just named Best Restaurateur in the country, which is a really big deal. And then we have Matt Vaughter of Rootstock in Breckenridge, who was named Best Chef in the Mountain Region. And it just signals food in Colorado is just getting better and better. It's exciting to be here.
It is. Good for us. My shout out is to Colin Prater. He works at Cheyenne Mountain High School. He's a biology teacher, and he made it into the U.S. Open at Pinehurst this weekend. He said he's never been to a U.S. Open, let alone play in one, and he's just one of the few slots of amateurs that got in. Who knows, right? But still, what an amazing thing. When he goes back and talks to his kids, what'd you do last summer? Hear what I did last summer, right? It'll be good. All right, thanks, panel, for coming this week. We appreciate you. Thanks to the 2 dads. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Thank you for watching as well or listening to our podcast. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.